So Grant Langston has spent 20 years at eHarmony. He's one of the longest served dating executives in the industry. He also was within that period, starting in 2000, he spent 3 years through 2020, 2021, 21 as the CEO. He then went on to Warehouse Exchange for the last 6 years, so actually with 2020. And he is here to give us an overview of like the very founding story of eHarmony, which would be wonderful to capture.
Look at that.
There we go. Great, Grant. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Mark.
Welcome. I've got a couple of questions for you. I told you I was going to call you heroic, so here we go. You had a heroic role at the very beginning of eHarmony's life. From what we were talking about, you helped it bring it back from the brink. What happened?
Yes. Okay. Well, I guess I need to put this in time. So I was running marketing for Warehouse Exchange in 20, I believe I took that role in 2012. And so, the business was quite siloed. We had a CEO, Neil Warren, who was one of the founders, and there was a COO, and, we had all of the parts of the business, and it all ran in a very siloed fashion, as can happen in a company like that. Marketing was my world, and we made TV commercials. We did a lot of other things, and seems things seem to be going very well for us. One day, I literally got a call, "Hey, come to the boardroom." I came down the hall, and the board of directors was there. And of course, I knew all those guys for many years, and they said, "Listen, we'd like to offer you the role as CEO of the business." I was quite dumbfounded. What about Neil? Neil was going to retire. Neil was quite an old person at that point. I don't know if a lot of people know. He was 65 when he started Harmony. He had planned to retire, and his son-in-law, who was the other founder, said, "Look, I think we should do something together." So you fast forward, years after that, and he was, if not 80, right at 80. And the board of directors said, "Would you like to take this role?" I said I wanted to talk to my wife and I wanted to think about it, but if I said no, what would they do? And they said, "Well, we need to tell you that the company is in a lot of distress. It is actually losing money." That was news to me. That's just the way the business was run. I was told to hit certain metrics with marketing, and I was doing that, and it seemed like things were great, but they were not great. The business was losing about $2 million a month. And I said, "How much money do we have in the bank?" And they said, "You've got $20 million in the bank." So that's an easy math problem. We've got 10 months to do something with this business. I said, "Anything else?" They said, "Yes, we're being sued by the state of California for some violations of auto renewal policy." Okay, what's the price tag there? They said, "That's $1 billion fine that we're looking at, which would destroy the company." Okay, what are you going to do if I say no? And they said, "We'll just run a regular search for a CEO." Well, I knew that 10 months was not going to be enough time for a person to be found, if they could convince a person to take the job under those circumstances. For that person to come in, get their hands around the problem and fix it was not very likely to happen. And so I talked to my wife and I said, you know, the thing is, I think hard for people to understand is that when you work in a business that long with a lot of the same people, they're not your colleagues, they're your
Mhm.
family, really. They're your friends for sure. You've been through so much with these people, every imaginable situation. You started the business when it was nothing, and there's a lot of trial by fire, and so you really love these people. And the idea that the company was just going to die was terrible to me. And I thought, well, I'll do this. I don't know if I can do it, but I'm probably the best person who's suited to do it in the time that's available. And so I took the job. So that's the circumstance that got us into this situation. And that was 2016.
How did you turn it around? So the company's losing $2 million a month. What were the levers that you pulled to resurrect it?
Yeah. Well, Neil was a guy that loved the team, loved the employees, was a kind of an inspirational person. There was a lot of maintenance of the company that just had not been tended to. And unfortunately, some of that was related to technology and related to headcount. Just give you an example. We had a trust and safety function in the business that dealt with all the things that trust and safety does, scamming and, issues of that type. That team was about 20 people. Now, when the business started, that was what was necessary to process the daily income of questions and issues. But software had been created in the interim that made many of those jobs redundant. We could do an improved job of trust and safety with fewer employees,
Mhm.
but there was just never any real work done to implement some of these software solutions. So there was a wholesale review of the business. Where can we improve the way that we do things? Of course, that does lead to layoffs. That was something that had not been done for many years, and it kind of fell to me to be the person to do it. That's always terrible, but it needed to be done. One other thing, a little bit of a kind of an inside baseball is TV had started to change. eHarmony was a big TV advertiser, and many years we were the number one or two or three cable TV advertiser in the United States. But TV every year was supplying fewer eyeballs and the prices go up. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing. You meet with the TV people and they say, yeah, we're going to provide smaller audiences, but the cost per is going to be increased 5%. And the first year, maybe that's okay. The second year, maybe that's okay. But eventually you start to feel a little like a fool for paying so much for so little. So we had to change our media agency. We had to change our TV strategy. That was a painful thing because it meant that there was not enough money to go around some months. And I had to literally get on a plane and fly to all of the networks. I remember flying to Atlanta to meet with TNT and to tell them, we don't have the money to pay the $2 million worth of ads that we've bought this month, but we still want you to run our ads and we'll pay you for the future while we work off this debt. And there was a lot of that kind of humble work of going to your partners, your media companies and vendors and saying, we're going to need help. And to be fair, many of them, most of them said, we'll work with you. So it was a combination of staffing, a combination of technology, a combination of reconfiguring media and making more of our acquisition rooted in performance, rooted in social media, rooted in things that were cheaper and more metric driven. Last thing I'll say, the business came to be what it was, and we played the cards that made sense. TV was a big winner for us. We didn't just go there because it was expensive. We went there because the people that came to us from television were better customers. They understood the business better for some reason. They took our questionnaire faster. They purchased at a higher rate and they bought higher tier services. So that was a very rich vein for us. And when TV began to change, we really had to reimagine how do we acquire people and what can we expect from them. So.
Thank you. That's fascinating. We were talking and you mentioned there was another time when eHarmony was brought back from the brink, and that was at the actual very beginning of its life. You think back to the very beginning. I was thinking the three OGs of eHarmony were Dr. Neil Clark Warren, of course, and Dr. Steve Carter, who did the algorithm, the compatibility profiling, and you did the marketing, and you were the consistent faces all the way through for the company. At the very beginning, though, there was another time when eHarmony was very much on the brink. Can you tell us about that as well, back in
I think
2000?
this is a great story to tell kind of early stage founders because it worked out. I guess it doesn't always work out, but I would add a couple of names just to be very, very fair. Yes, Steve Carter came to the business because the man who had been asked to create the matching algorithm, Dr. Buckwalter, was working. He was not hired as an employee to eHarmony, but he was doing that work, and Steve was his PhD student, and he referred him into the business. And then the other founder was Greg Forgatch, who was Neil's son-in-law. Greg was the CEO of the business in the early years. So I'm working away one day. We're 2 years into the business. It's very rough, very rocky. There's probably 15 of us, 18 of us there. And Greg Forgatch's head pops up above my cubicle and says, "Hey, man, we're out of money. Today's going to need to be your last day." And, I knew things weren't going great, but I did not know we were out of money. And I just sat there. You put a lot into these kind of early stage businesses, and it was shocking to me. And after about a half hour, I went to his office because he was walking around the area telling the same thing to everybody. I went to his office and I said, "Listen, if we're going to close up, you're going to need someone here to button the business up, communicate with the users, all that kind of thing. I'd like to stay and do that for the 30 days or whatever it would take." And he said, "Well, I had already asked so and so to do that, but you'd be a better guy to do it. So I'm going to tell him he's done today and you can stay." That guy, it was a good ending story for him too. Dan Collins is his name, but Dan Collins went home that day and Grant did not. In that interim period of 30 days, our strategy was, okay, we don't have any money. We do have PR, and we've got Neil, who is good in PR. He's a good, this guy's written 10 books about mate selection. He's a public speaker. He's good in PR situations. And we had some success couples, just a few, 3 or 4. And so we said, why don't we find some PR outlets that will allow us to get Neil on there with some success couples? And so we did that. We called around, we found some outlets that were niche. We got Neil on a Focus on the Family radio show. Anyone who would say yes, we would say yes. And we had Neil do press with the success couples. And that effort got traction. And we were able to sell enough subscriptions to go further. And PR became the engine of the business. And so that's really what saved the company. The next phase of that was radio commercials. We're like, well, we're doing radio shows. Why don't we advertise on radio? And we used the success couples in some radio spots and ran those for a few months. And that made a big difference. And then the jump was made to TV commercials. And so, the concept was, when Harry Met Sally, I don't know the last time you watched that movie, but there are these interstitials throughout the movie where couples sit on a bench with a white background and talk about their relationship. And when I first saw the movie, I thought they were real. Of course, I now know that they were actors, but it was that idea that we said, you know what? Why don't we steal that and put these couples in front of white backgrounds so it's just the people, and they can talk about the love they have for each other and how compatible they are. And we think that will communicate the business prop. And so that's how the traction, and we went back and hired all those people back. Dan Collins got his job back, but that's how we came very close to just shutting down in like the second year.
Amazing. I didn't know that. That's well done for bringing it through. And then beyond that, the company grew. And I remember starting Online Personals Watch back in June 2004. And one of our early news summaries was a summary for eHarmony, raising, it was $110 million, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you go? Wow. What did that look like for that period? I think it's about 2004, 2005.
Yeah. 2005, I think. Well, one of the things about this space is that there's a trend, maybe a fad aspect to it. Things become the flavor of the year or flavor of the month because people want to be on the app where all their friends are. They want to be in the popular space. And so when you become that, it feeds on itself. And eHarmony became that. They did skits about us on Saturday Night Live. Jay Leno on the Tonight Show did skits where he dressed up like Neil and he did some kind of thing. All that just propels you to a place where a lot of people want to be on the site. And the economics of the business were also quite good, right? I mean, it was a high margin business. At the time, the investment community did not seem that spooked by the churn that is inherent in online dating. I think that changed pretty quickly, and we can talk about that later. That's one of the real challenges, is that your best customers leave. But eHarmony seemed like it had unlocked that, because we took our best customers who left and we made them testimonial couples who therefore generated more users. So we sort of hacked that problem. And I think, Sequoia and TCV just said, this is a business that is necessary. This is a business that is needed and will happen in modern society. This is how people need to meet. It's way better than the alternatives. And so they did invest significantly in the company. And it was a thrilling time. I mean, we opened a London office and a Sydney office, and we opened an office in Sao Paulo. And it was a amazing, fun thing to be involved in.
Why is eHarmony special?
Well, if you think about the world eHarmony was born into, it was very disruptive. I mean, most of the people on this call today probably don't were children in 2000, but online dating in 2000 was for hooking up. It was for finding a person to hook up with. When you wanted to have a real relationship, you went offline to your friends or your school or your religious community. That's what you did when it was time to get serious. Online dating was for having fun. There was one exception to that, and that's JDate. JDate was for serious relationships, but it was tiny. And eHarmony came into that market and said, you know what? We think this tool can be used to find real love, real long-term love. And I got laughed at in a lot of dinner parties when I shared that philosophy. People just thought that was ridiculous. And if they thought it was maybe possible that a computer could help find your mate, they didn't think the majority of the people in the world would feel that way. And it was kind of a doomed business idea. But unlike most tech businesses, we had no capacity to pivot. Neil was an old psychologist. He wasn't interested in being anything other than what he was. And if what he was didn't work, he'd just go play golf and retire. He didn't care. So there was an authenticity to that brand. It wasn't a bunch of smart MBAs trying to find product market fit. It was a guy and his team just being what we were. And I think that came through. We also were not interested in the most attractive people. We were interested in helping the average person. It was not a business that was rooted in the coastal elite community that most companies seem to want to capture. We were kind of a middle America. The advertising reflected that. We used people that would never be on TV to say, I met the love of my life. And that was so fresh, and people responded to the authenticity and the freshness. That's the first part of the answer. And the second part of the answer is, my opinion, the technology really worked.
Mm-hmm.
I did not think it would work when I started there. I thought, how are we going to do this? But the concept of matching people who are similar in foundational ways based on real research did create more compatible people who had better relationships. So it wasn't just BS. It wasn't just a marketing slogan. It literally was making better couples who were suited for longer relationships.
What would you, you tried matchmaking, I remember. There was a period which you had a shot at matchmaking and actually matched it as well at a similar time. Match hired 4 matchmakers in Texas and experimented with matchmaking. And you had your own spin on that as well. Can you tell us about the matchmaking experiment?
I can because I ran it.
Yeah.
I was asked to run that group. So that, the meeting went something like this. There is a segment of this industry where people pay a lot of money to be matched by a person. And those matchmakers have a real problem, and that is they don't have any supply.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of matchmakers, Julie Furman and many others, and you talk to them and they run through airports with their business card and they see an attractive person and they're like, "Hi, are you single?" It's a tough thing for them to get supply to match with their customers. Well, eHarmony had endless supply. I mean, we had tons of supply. And so it seemed like a real natural for us to have some professionals who would work with what were usually high net worth individuals and to use our massive supply and our matching algorithms to bring them together to people. And when we launched that business, it really worked like a charm. I think in the first year, although the numbers are a little fuzzy, I mean, top line, we made like $7 million, which was way ahead of what we expected. The problem is, of course, it's not got the kind of margins that a computer based matching system does, right? If eHarmony had a 50, 60 plus percent margin, and a business that hires master's degree licensed clinical social workers or psychology professionals, it's got a pretty expensive overhead. And I'll never forget, at some point we had signed up way more people than our plan was. The business was doing well, and I went to the board of directors and I said, "Okay, we have this many subscribers. We're going to have to go and hire more psychologists." And the board was like, "Wait a minute. Why are you hiring more people?" I said, "Guys, this isn't a computer matching service. This is like a hotel. If I build a new wing to my hotel, I've got to go hire more maids because the beds have to be made up before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The rooms have to be cleaned. It doesn't scale like a tech business does. It's got a human labor component that is kind of one to one. It's not, exponential growth." And they were very displeased with it. And they said, "Wow, you can have some time to try and fix that problem, Grant, but if you can't find a way to scale this without just hiring more matchmakers, we're not going to get the margins that we want to make." So, we did it another year, and it also got a little creepy as we had success and we started to marry some of these people. We got more and more high net worth people. And the price of the product went up too. I think in the end, we were charging $25,000. And we were getting people who would fly to town on their plane and, want to see the best looking women. And it just started to move in a direction that felt not authentic to the brand and a little creepy, to be honest. So all those things together, the poor margin, the labor costs, the fact that we were attracting a certain kind of high net worth man, that all added to the decision to just turn it off. And that's really what we did. But it was great when we did it. And it was one of my favorite things to ever be involved in. I think I wish I had been able to brief the leadership of the company at the time. This is a different kind of business. This isn't going to look like a technology business. And that's why it didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, matchmaking doesn't seem to be that higher technology business, so it's in some ways quite antithetical to the main business, of course, but maybe that's about to change with AI. And you've had some experience recently with AI, in fact, with Warehouse Exchange. I looked on your LinkedIn, it says you, in quote, delivered 30% conversion lift via agentic AI. Of course, agentic AI is very hot right now. Can you tell us more about that? What did you learn?
Yes. Well, warehouse exchange is really just like Airbnb, but for warehouse space. So that's the idea. It's a marketplace. People list warehouse space that they aren't using or that's vacant, people that need warehouse space. It tends to be the smaller end of the market, although not always in terms of square footage. And so we have a lot of shoppers that come on to Warehouse Exchange and look for warehouse space. And those people just wander around. And that is not great for a marketplace. I mean, you really want to funnel people into the actions that you want them to do. That can be hard if they're shopping. It's hard to drive them if they're shopping. And so the idea was, why don't we have an agent that sort of meets them at the door, understands what they want to do, helps them look at the warehouses. And the idea or the success metric in that instance is to drive them to tour the building. That's a necessary step in that business. People want to see the warehouse before they move their business there. So that was the idea. We, it's hard because there's infinite ways to use a warehouse. And you could say to the agentic AI, well, I want to build a nuclear bomb. And if you've told it to check a list of approved uses or disapproved uses, it'll look down that list and say, well, there's no prohibition against a nuclear bomb. Sure, no problem. You can build a nuclear bomb there. So you have a conflict of what they would call a small language model versus a large language model. And that was the trick. We had to work that out so that the agent was able to realistically provide, yes, that's good. No, that's not good. Or sometimes we need to ask someone else about this. That was the idea. As with a lot of AI, not that hard to construct, hard for that conceptual reason that I mentioned. And once you install that, and of course you're meeting people at the door 24/7, Sunday morning at 1 a.m. If someone wants to shop for warehouse space, that agentic AI is there. That really made that made an impact on the business. And so that's what that idea is. And I think it's a good lesson for all to try to understand, where can AI help and where is it kind of a gimmick? In this case, it made a big difference.
Interesting. I mean, there are some comparisons here with, you've got a platform where you search, like a dating company, but you've introduced agentic AI to reproduce what a real estate agent might do, really, in guiding someone to the right match.
That's
So
right.
doesn't that sound like a matchmaker?
Listen, the reason I took the job at Warehouse Exchange is because I'm a marketplace guy and
Yeah.
I love marketplaces. And under the hood, eHarmony and Warehouse Exchange were very similar businesses
Yeah.
with the obvious differences. But of course, you're 100% right. I think, though, in the matchmaking space, there's an extra layer, and that is, if you want to talk to me about a warehouse, and I know you're not a human being, I have a tolerance for that. Although some people did not, to be frank. Some people said, I don't want to talk to a virtual assistant. Just full stop.
Hmm.
I think if you were talking about love
Why?
and it's just the state of where we are in this
Yeah.
process. Like my children won't get in a Waymo. I like Waymo. I ride around in Waymo. It's pretty weird. There's no driver there. But they say it's crazy. They're teenagers. It's crazy to get in a car with no driver. People used to say that about elevators, right? There's no one driving this elevator. I'm not going to get in this
Yeah.
elevator. It'll crash to the ground. But eventually you begin to test. And I do think at some point people will be willing to say to an AI agent, you know what, I'm interested in finding someone to fall in love with. And here's who I am. And they just basically get interviewed.
Mm.
Wouldn't that be great? Just get interviewed for 5 minutes and a profile creates itself. And you of course check it and verify that you feel that it's right. But I think that day's coming.
How far, I mean, you had hands-on with this kind of concept at Warehouse Exchange. Given your viewpoint of the technology, how far away do you think we are to effectively guiding people, using AI to guide people and transform the experience of online dating?
Oh, I'm sure someone's working on it today. I mean, I don't think we're far at all. In my mind, the authenticity of the person is paramount, the person I'm being connected to. I mean, I had no interest in any artificial anything in that experience. I'd like them to if the system could verify that the photo is unretouched, I'd like that. If it can verify that the person is exactly who they say they are, I'd like that. I wanna make sure that what I see and if there's communication, what happens there is completely authentic. But the rest of it, I think it's for me, it's all about how good is it. I was
Mhm.
interviewed by a company, an AI agent interviewed me. This is a couple weeks ago, and they were quite good. I mean, I would say things, and it was clearly listening, and it was synthesizing my ideas. Well, Grant, don't you think it's true then, based on what you say, that X would equal Y? So I think that someone's working on it today. The adoption problem, harder to speak to. But I think if you were talking about a target of 20 and 30 somethings, I think you could have this thing going fairly soon. Yeah.
You've guided eHarmony through quite a bumpy road in the past and seen both sides of the coin. Would you say you're bullish about the online dating industry now? Because I think we're in a bit of a bumpy road right now.
Yeah. Well, here's what I think, Mark. The big companies are in some trouble, right? There's been a commoditization of this business. People don't even know what app they're on anymore. They're all the same. There's a challenge in that the users aren't interested in bells and whistles. They just want to meet somebody that's well matched and get off this app. They don't want this special thing or this special thing. It's always been a challenge. And I'm just not sure how the big companies reinvent themselves to be what they once were. I mean, I think it may be very well true that Bumble and Match and these guys stay around with lower earnings, with less. It just becomes a business that's almost like a utility, right? Everyone who's at the stage of life needs to use it. It's all the same feature set, works pretty good. There's some annoying things. It gets incrementally better. Prices are low to participate. So I guess I don't think I'm bearish, but I don't think I'm bullish about the big boys.
Mhm.
I think, though, one of the great things about this space has always been that the small niche player can build a great business.
Yeah.
You can serve a community, right? You could serve, I think, Catholics in the Metroplex in Texas, in Dallas, Fort Worth. You could build a business that's really deeply accepted in that community and have a nice revenue and have a business that really serves people. I think that's very possible. Or different identity groups, right? Military dating. I mean, there's just so many ways to build a small business that work that I don't think that is in the same sort of dire position that some of the big guys are. I think that's possible, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. But I don't sit around with a lot of hope that there's a great new idea. And when I talk to the founders of some of the newest apps, I hear not a lot of great ideas either. I hear a lot of, well, I'm young like my users, and that means I know them better. And I think that's not a great reason to have a business because you're young too and you get to be in the ads. I just don't hear a lot of new ideas. But the people on this call today are perhaps where those ideas will come from. So who knows?
Thank you for your insights today, Grant. We appreciate your time today. So thank you. This was landmark. Very, very appreciated.
Thank you.